This is Mary Henry. She's starting a new job as an organ player in Utah. But what's that? The shadow of a weird old building. It's calling to her. She's seeing visions that are trying to get her to visit this abandoned place next to the Great Salt Lake.
This used to be quite a place. It's been deserted for a long time now.
Will you take me in?
My goodness, no.
At this point, me and Mary have a lot in common. Sure, she's being tempted to this Carnival of Souls because she is the sole survivor of a car accident and now finds the dead are trying to welcome her. Whereas I'm being tempted to this building because it's an interesting example of a revival from the 1800s, and I'd love to just walk around in a place where people historically had fun, but is now just a ghost of its previous pleasure. So her and I are twins. Her character is from the 1962 independent horror film Carnival of Souls. The plot I pretty much just described. I originally didn't search out this movie. This movie was on, I walked by the TV while Mary Henry is driving by the building, and like the siren song this building is, I started to watch. And by the time we see a close-up, I'm like, is this the Saltair Pavillion? It is the Saltair Pavillion. If you don't know what the Saltair Pavillion is, boy do I have a video for you. This one. This was the original Saltair, which we will refer to as Saltair I. If that sounds foreboding for its future, good catch. It was originally finished in 1893, and it was envisioned as this perfect resort. But instead of being on the ocean, the Saltair sat above the Great Salt Lake. And if you're curious what makes it so great, there are parts of this lake that are 10 times more salty than the ocean. And if you're wondering what that feels like on human skin, we'll get back to that. Wanting to put a resort next to a big body of water isn't a surprise, but the style of the building might be. It was a joint effort funded by a Mormon corporation and the Salt Lake and Los Angeles Railway. And they built something that looks a bit like a mosque. Bulbous onion domes, minarets, and horseshoe arches. This specific style is sometimes referred to as a Moorish Revival. And when you follow this style, it weaves in and out of the existing architectural styles at the time. An 1849 Rochester, New York building that looks nearly identical to an Italianate except for its OG arches above the doorway and windows. An 1883 Queen Anne in Minneapolis, Minnesota that was remodeled 7 years later to include the addition of these two beautiful domes. But then you get buildings like the estate of P.T. Barnum, built in Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1848. He named it Iranistan. And if that feels like a fetishization and mislabeling of a culture, you are not going to like the rest of his Wikipedia page. In less than a decade after it was built, that mansion burned down. But what you see in the illustrations are 5 symmetrical domes, large windows, and a balcony with countless cutouts. But its inspiration and its architect was not from Iran or Pakistan. It was a London architect, and it's said to be inspired by the Royal Pavilion built in Brighton, England, which of course was inspired by the places England was colonizing. The architect of Saltair I was also not from the United States. He was Richard Cleating, an immigrant from Germany who had trained at a firm in Paris, where he had completed drawings for the Dome of Sacré-Cœur. He was a bit of a dome guy. I really can't overemphasize how popular Saltair was. This book from 1908 spoke of the thousands it drew daily. The dance floor was really big. And if you don't believe me, look at this photo that makes me feel claustrophobic just looking at it. There were bands that performed, there were arcades, a merry-go-round, and a roller coaster, all resting on top of 2,500 pilings, 3/4 of a mile into the Great Salt Lake from the shore. A big part of what made this place so popular was how beautiful it was. You can even see it in the photos, the postcards, but it's especially noticeable when the photos are taken from afar, where this building seems to be blooming out of the water, like Atlantis. That would be if Atlantis was built completely out of wood. We know this because if you look at the Sanborn maps from 1898, you see a lot of yellow. These maps were for insurance companies to assess risk of a fire. The maps would mark different materials of the building in different colors. Yellow for wood, red for brick, gray for iron, and brown for adobe. So as you can see, this whole place is in wood. In a later 1911 map, you can see how much the amenities had grown. We've got a skating rink, a roller coaster, a beer hall, and a hippodrome. But I'm still seeing a lot of yellow on that map. And again, yellow means wood. So the Saltair I burned down in 1925, 32 years after it opened up. You can see in this photo the remnants of one of the few things that wasn't wood, the roller coaster tracks. But this was a place thousands of people were visiting a day. So by the next season, Saltair II was rebuilt and reopened. If you look at it solely from Sanborn maps, it looks pretty similar to the original, but in the actual photos, you can tell some differences. Although it still has the domes, numbers-wise, it feels like less. And the place appears to be simplified, but a bit more sturdy. More plaster walls, less details carved out of wood. Now this is the Saltair that we started this video with, the one that mesmerizes Mary Henry. But even if the location is the same with the same basic outline, something feels different now. And if we use a chart from a report by the Department of the Interior on water levels and quality, we can see a bit of why Saltair II was more abandoned when our protagonist walked through it. This chart is measuring the water levels in feet above sea level. So in 1893, Saltair I was built. In 1925, it burned down. In 1926, Saltair II was built. It operated until 1956. And in 1962, Herk Harvey paid $50 to rent the Saltair II for the filming of Carnival of Souls. And if you plot these points on our chart, you'll notice, damn, that lake sure was on the low side from the 1930s on. And that downward graph is also what happened to the visitors of Saltair. Nearly everything was changing around the Saltair II. The automobile was becoming the main form of transit. There was a train that went directly to Saltair, which wasn't as needed when there were cars. There were more entertainment options closer to the city, movies, the radio. The Great Depression happened. The Saltair II became more of a dance hall and a venue for traveling bands, but it was a huge place to maintain. World War II temporarily closed Saltair. And in the background, as you can see from the chart, the water level just keeps going down. One of the selling points was this beautiful place over the water, but now the water wasn't there. They tried different ways of keeping this a water experience, driving people the miles to the lake's edge, or pumping water from the lake into a 4-acre pool, but it wasn't the same. The Saltair II officially closed in 1956. But even before it was already dead, it was being treated to a funeral. This article from July 1954 in the Ford Times, a monthly magazine from Ford Motors that didn't make the shift to digital. It reminisced on the Saltair's past. George S. Nelson described growing up there. His father owned the place. He talks about the bathing suits, the train that ran every 45 minutes, the thousands dancing in the pavilion. And despite his nepotism, despite his rose-colored nostalgia glasses, you can still hear the small things that would make this place hard to enjoy. The opening sentence sounds more Stephen King than Rick Steves. The visitor, seeing the sign, "Turn here to world-famous Saltair" on US 40, may be unimpressed by the first sight of this inland sea. There are no lush shores. The salt-encrusted beaches repel even the growth of grass. No fish enliven its waters. A minute salt shrimp is the only inhabitant. The lake looks barren and silent. Okay, so a tough intro. Let's see how he remembers his arrival to the Saltair. Even the smell of decaying salt shrimp on the lake shore does not bother me. That smell meant our train was nearly at the Saltair gates, and soon I'd be swimming in the lake. And this smell and the shrimp situation was not just a sense memory for this guy. It even made it into documents trying to decide Saltair's future. After Saltair closed, the property was given to the Utah State Park and Recreation Commission, and they used this document to look at the opportunities, but mostly just outlined that this place was stinky. The problems are much greater than simple recreation use of the area. Some of them are A, the fluctuating level of the lake, B, the odors from the shrimp on shallow shorelines. Take that, Sally at the seaside. C, only a portion of shoreline has suitable beaches. D, unstable lake bottom to support dikes and highway. E, eliminating human pollution from the lake. F, need for providing fresh water, sanitation facilities, and power to the developed area. And you might say, Kendra, that's enough. We don't need to kick this lake while it's in a drought. But might I interest you in my own diary entry from July 2006, when I barely floated in the Great Salt Lake, listing out, like that commission, all the things I didn't enjoy. Number 7 on that list is it smells bad. As if I was going to need this in the future, I even drew a diagram of my Salt Lake experience, of course with a key, so you could better imagine the path I took. So let me walk you through my experience in my own adolescent language. The last day, yesterday, we, Mom and I, went swimming in the Great Salt Lake. By the way, it isn't that great. So we go to the part you're supposed to swim. Barely anyone was there. Only one family, so we leave our shoes in the car. Huge mistake. The sand wasn't that hot at the beginning, but next thing we knew, my mom and I were running as fast as we could to get to the cooler sand. In between the water and the sand, there are bunches of flies in a giant swarm. They don't bite, but they are some scary shit. Anyway, they're in such big swarms that they make big clouds of black. I already was flipping out. I had to run super fast through all the scary flies to get to the very warm water. The warm water was filled with brine shrimp and dead flies. Yuck. Then there was a sandbar of sharp rocks. Picture on back of page. More cloud flies and other stuff. Once we were in the lake, I attempted to float. It is supposed to be really easy because of the salt levels, but I still had trouble. Then I got water, only a little bit, in my eye. There is 5 times the salt in this lake than the ocean. My eyes burn from the salt. I couldn't even open them for about 1 hour and a half. Now, when I floated in this water in 2006, I was going when it was at a low point. A more recently updated Great Salt Lake water elevation table, like this one by Craig Miller, an engineer from the Utah Division of Water Resources, show that it was about as low when I went as it was when the Saltair II closed for good. It was even lower when Carnival of Souls was filmed. So those long shots taken from this building that show a small sliver of water glistening miles away seems accurate. Or the very white sand that might actually just be salt surrounding the main gate that she enters. The footage of Mary Henry walking through Saltair II is some of the best footage I could find of this place. Nothing is as beautiful or well produced as this character walking upstairs, getting scared by a mattress slide, walking in a dance hall filled with decorations and garbage. Sure, it's years after its glory, but you get a real sense of the place in a way that feels alive. When you see her walking through it, you can really understand its size. Carnival of Souls isn't just a special movie for the place it shows. It's special in how it managed to get made. Herk Harvey directed and produced this film with the funding of his local community in Lawrence, Kansas. He raised $17,000 by asking local businesses for $500 donations. But it was not a success at first. It had a bad distribution deal when it was first released, and their distributor never filed for a copyright. But it got a bit of a second chance. 25 years later, it was reissued and actually given a copyright. And from there, it was screened at Munich Film Festival in 1990. Herk Harvey attended. But he assumed, like its initial release, it would be underwhelming. But at that festival, the seats were completely full. There were people sitting in the aisles. He was asked questions about the production all night. This movie became a cult classic. It was part of Halloween programming for Revival House theaters. Now it's in the Criterion Collection. And it was the beautiful footage of this building that got me digging deeper. We're lucky Carnival of Souls got permission to film here, because this is one of the last times you can really see the Saltair II. The building was long gone when Carnival of Souls got renewed interest. The film released in 1963. A fire in 1967 burned the surrounding buildings, and 3 years later, in 1970, the main Saltair II building burned down. Nothing was left. You might assume that that's where the Saltair story ends. 2 buildings spanning over 75 years. It's a good run. But there is a Saltair III. It was built in a new location 2 miles southwest of the original. It's directly off I-80, no longer rested on pilings. Just a rectangular building with a few windows and shapes that feel reminiscent of the past Saltair. And of course, it wouldn't be the Saltair without the bulbous domes on top. Now they are shiny and gold. It was built in 1982 using parts from an unused airplane hangar. But you know that water level chart by Craig Miller? What happened in between the 1970s and my fly fiasco? Oh yeah, the highest lake elevation since 1875. A storm filled the building soon after it was built. It would sit pretty wet for 10 years until the water levels returned to their usual. The building seemed like it was probably dead in the water, but it was purchased again and now operates as a music venue. You could have seen Haim there earlier this month. But the thing I find very interesting about this building's 3rd iteration is its architectural details. We now have 3 buildings to compare, each trying to build a connection to its predecessor in a completely new time period. The first Saltair was a Victorian pavilion, but with the added interest of domes and doorways and windows inspired by countries thousands of miles away. The entire building seemed open air. From far away, it looks like a building put together with toothpicks. Or maybe matchsticks. The Saltair II has the same outline, but parts of it seem simplified. The towers don't go as high. The front entry archway seems more curved, like a horseshoe. The pavilion seems more enclosed. But then there are the additions. There are OG archways on the bottom floor that weren't there before. And in the Saltair III, it becomes a brand new building, with only the most obvious connections to the original. The symmetrical domes, and the large horseshoe arch that holds the front door. The OG arches are more shapely, but you can no longer look through them since they are just stenciled into concrete. I will admit this is not my most knowledgeable area of architecture, but thankfully there are books that are desperate to teach you things. I could see the details that Saltair had been inspired by, even if it was a game of telephone by the time it got to them. The horseshoe arch looks like that gate at Bab Mansour in Morocco from 1732. The tomb of Akbar in India from 1605, with its multiple floors of ogee archways on top of each other. The way the floors look from afar reminds me of the Saltair. The minarets on the Badshahi Mosque in Pakistan from 1671 have horseshoe arches on an octagonal tower. That same idea you can see on the towers next to the entry and on the backside of the Saltair I. The domes on the Saltair are also unintentionally supplying regional information about the building. Today, the domes and minarets often serve as the external visual markers of the mosque. In many cases, the dome profile defines the building style and is dependent on regional tradition. Mughal mosques, such as the Jami Masjid of Shahjahanabad, 1656, in Delhi, are immediately recognizable by their bulbous onion-shaped domes. The reason the Saltair ever existed might just be because the style was in vogue at the time, but I think there is a bit more to it. This location is in a desert. So is a lot of its inspiration. But while I was reading about all of these buildings, their materials kept sticking out to me. These are buildings made of sandstone, sometimes marble, rammed earth, bricks, but not very often wood. When it comes to regional architecture, you can quickly see the benefits of building off what has come before you. A slow evolution that helps you realize when airflow helps and when it hurts. The cool breeze supplied by a wind catcher is a lot safer when the materials are hard to burn. And when I think of these old exotic revivals, I notice how much they are removing location from the equation. The Great Salt Lake is windy, has intense sun exposure, and as the name suggests, is extremely salty. Just like salt dried out my eyes, it can dry out wood as well. And when I think more about it, I'm surprised the first Saltair made it 32 years. It's made entirely out of wood with open archways where strong breezes could enter every corner of the building. I, of course, wish Saltair I and Saltair II had never burned down. But the Saltair has something that most buildings never get, and that's memorialized. I spent hours just flipping through the hundreds of digitized images in the archives at the University of Utah. I got to see Saltair II's exterior and interior through the eyes of Mary Henry in the Carnival of Souls. This horror movie gave us a view on a place intended for fun, pleasure, entertainment, dancing, and will now always be connected with this shot of lost souls waltzing high speed on the biggest dilapidated dance floor in America. Many people will watch this movie without ever knowing the story of what this building was. Now, I'm bummed I don't have any photos of my experience at the Great Salt Lake. I think my mom and I were both too busy experiencing it to really capture it in any way. But I'm really glad that I wrote it down, made a diagram, have it digitized because of this video. And although I spoke kind of negatively about the Great Salt Lake in that entry, when I think back on it, it's a positive memory. I remember my mom slowly realizing this was not going to be the mother-daughter experience she envisioned. Us finding out we didn't have enough quarters for the state park showers, so I couldn't wash out my eyes. When I read through that entry, I was surprised at all the things that I mentioned. I'd forgotten about the smell and the hot sand. I just turned it into a memory that I share with my mom that I love. So I guess this is my recommendation: to film an independent movie in a weird place you think is special. And if you can't do that, write a journal entry about it. Take some photos of it. Put them up on Wikipedia. Share them with your friends. We don't know all the things that won't make it to the next decade. So log it while you got it. Happy Halloween, everyone. I have a lot of videos that have to do with Halloween or things being scary, all of that stuff. So I'll link the playlist here. Thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon. I also now have made it available on YouTube through YouTube memberships. So if you want to sign up there, you can. You'll get a bonus video at the end of this month. I don't know what it's going to be yet. So if anyone has any ideas, tell me in the comments. Have a good Halloween. Bye.